In 1999, the lowest scoring quarter of a Cornell University logic test rated their own performance in the 68th percentile. They had actually scored in the 12th. When researchers showed them their errors directly afterward, their self-assessments barely shifted. Dunning and Justin Kruger still cannot fully account for the one detail that makes no sense: the brain producing certainty that is completely indistinguishable from the inside from real competence. The study involved 65 Cornell undergraduates, 3 domains with objectively correct answers: logical reasoning, English grammar, identifying genuinely funny jokes. After the test, each participant estimated their own score. The top performers slightly underestimated themselves, which is its own interesting finding. But the bottom quartile, the students who got the most wrong, consistently believed they had done well. Not slightly better than reality, dramatically better. They placed themselves comfortably above average, and when pressed, they reported no uncertainty, no nagging sense that something was off. They didn't just misjudge their performance. They had no experience of misjudging at all. Here is where the anomaly sharpens. Kruger and Dunning took a second group of low performers and taught them the actual skills, walked them through correct logical reasoning techniques. After training, their test scores improved as expected. But something else happened, something the researchers hadn't specifically planned to measure. Their self-assessments changed too. Suddenly they looked back at their original answers and recognized they had been wrong. The knowledge required to perform well turned out to be the exact same knowledge required to know you were performing badly. You cannot have one without the other. That detail sat in the 1999 data, and it still has no clean explanation. The obvious reading is ego. Overconfidence is everywhere. People overestimate their driving, their memory, their health. There are well-documented optimism biases, self-serving attribution mechanisms, a dozen cognitive shortcuts that keep us feeling competent. The assumption is that Dunning-Kruger is just another layer of the same thing, the brain puffing itself up, as brains always have, to protect self-esteem. But here is what makes that impossible. Optimism bias inflates everyone's estimates roughly equally. It does not produce a ceiling effect, where the worst performers become the most confident while the best performers remain calibrated. And more critically, it doesn't explain the subjective experience of the low scorers. They weren't suppressing doubt. They weren't pushing uncertainty down. Brain imaging studies conducted on comparable tasks in the decades since found no elevated activity in regions associated with ego defense or emotional suppression. The false certainty wasn't being manufactured over something real. It was simply the only signal present. There was nothing underneath it being managed. And here is the deepest part. Metacognition, the capacity to think about your own thinking, depends on the same neural architecture as the skill being evaluated. To assess whether you understand logic, you use logic. To evaluate your own grammar, you use grammar. The system checking the output is the same system that produced it. A broken thermometer cannot report that it is broken. What the 1999 data showed, when mapped against competence levels, was that the gap between perceived performance and actual performance wasn't random. It was systematic. It followed the competence curve precisely in reverse. The less skill, the less insight into the absence of skill. Not proportional, inverse, which means something stranger than simple overconfidence is operating. The mechanism that would generate doubt requires the competence that is missing. The brain cannot produce the signal for uncertainty it has never learned to produce. In 2020, researchers Jignac and Zajankowski challenged the Dunning-Kruger effect itself, arguing much of it was a statistical artifact in how the data was collected. But they never touched this. They couldn't. The subjective experience of certainty in the unskilled remains completely unaccounted for. 3 explanations have been attempted. First, it is entirely statistical regression to the mean, an artifact of data distribution, not a real psychological mechanism. The problem is that simulated datasets do not explain why real subjects reported genuine subjective certainty, not merely inflated numerical estimates on a survey. Second, it is a failure of environmental feedback. People with low skills rarely receive clear correction in daily life. If you write poorly, no one tells you. Incompetence is invisible by default, but the original study gave participants immediate, direct, unambiguous feedback. The correct answers right there. They couldn't use it. The information was present. The tool to process it was not. Third, it is domain-specific calibration. Some people simply don't know what good logic looks like. True, but that circles straight back to the original problem and explains nothing about the mechanism generating the confidence signal itself. What nobody has resolved is this. If the brain generates certainty, and the brain cannot distinguish accurate certainty from false certainty, then the feeling of knowing something means nothing on its own. You have no internal instrument for this. The question Dunning and Kruger never answered, the one that still sits open, is whether any of us can determine from the inside which kind of certainty we're experiencing right now.